It's Saturday, May 9th, 2015, and you're listening to SYN Boldly, podcast, the Sign Your Name Project. I'm your host, Trey Comstock, and back with me as ever is Stephen Doss.
I'm back.
Yeah, we're all back, and we are back to discuss actually one of the hottest religious topics of the week. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Dallas shooting that took place on Sunday in this week's section called The News. It's been too long.
There we go.
The buttons.
So many buttons.
It's true. So, in case you live under a rock or don't follow your CNN newsfeed quite as closely as I do, on Sunday, two men, opened fire and fired at security, at police, at an event. It was basically a contest for cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad at the Caldwell Event Center in North Garland, Texas. This event was put on by a group that calls themselves the American Freedom Defense Initiative. Yes, the American Freedom Defense Initiative, which the Southern Poverty Law Center, by the way, considers an Islamophobic hate group. What this group was doing was trying to make the statement that we, as Americans, can depict the Prophet Muhammad however we choose, because that's our constitutional right, and Muslims can't do it. This is them. Me paraphrasing them. Muslims can't do anything about it because depicting an image of the Prophet Muhammad is considered blasphemous in Islam. Now, as I understand it, the Islamic State has taken credit for the attack. The two individuals who opened fire on police were promptly killed. And so this is this huge publicized event. The American Freedom Defense Initiative, this is their point, right? We need to be able to stand up to this is them, actually, the Islamification of American culture. And, a local imam in Dallas, in responding to the event, Imam Zaid Sheikh, I've said this wrong, I'm sure. No offense, I just can't pronounce Arabic or the darn. Shots fired at Pamela Geller event. She's the kind of the impresario of the American Freedom Defense Initiative. The community, I think he's referring to the Muslim community in Dallas, stayed away from event. Seems like a lone wolf type of attack, just what we didn't want. And I think he's absolutely right. I get the sense, does not represent mainstream Muslim thought, and certainly not mainstream American Muslim thought. But this is also the second time something like this has happened in kind of recent memory. I just finished writing an ethics paper about the Charlie Hebdo attack back in January, where 17 people were killed, also by Islamic State gunmen. Again, over a cartoon representation of the Prophet Muhammad. And so this is now two events in 6 months where there have been deadly consequences on the first time, both for the attackers and innocent people. And in the second time around, it was only the gunmen who were killed. I believe one police officer was injured, but don't quote me on that. But it wasn't, there wasn't no innocent person was killed in this. So Stephen, what's your initial reaction to this kind of trend of deaths over representations of the Prophet Muhammad?
It's interesting. Interesting.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
It has been a while. We talk pretty one day. It's interesting. Just a little backstory, background information on that. It's not just Muhammad that cannot be.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's also Moses, Abraham, Jesus. Any prophet can't be depicted.
Okay.
Because the understanding is if you are creating an image of that, you could potentially be placing them up with Allah, with God.
Right.
And there's no God but Allah. So as people of the book, Christians, we have the Trinity, with God the Father, Christ, his Son, and the Holy Spirit. Excuse me. In Islam, they don't have that because there is only Allah. And that's why if you go to a mosque or if you look at a book, there's no pictures. It's mainly script, words. Because when you create a graven image, even as innocent as it could be, it still could potentially be seen as worshiping something other than Allah.
Okay.
And so that's why it's considered blasphemous. It's especially blasphemous with Muhammad, since he is considered the founder of Islam, and the prophet where everything was revealed to him. That has the biggest potential for accidental godhood, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I get it.
Mm-hmm. And so it's very dangerous to say, like, here's the founder of our religion, because in the Islamic world, the founder of the religion is Allah.
Right.
That's that. And when you have, what you have is a big clash between this fundamentalist belief that, this is blasphemy as off limits, and those who perpetuate it deserve punishment. And then you have the Western belief that free speech is free speech, and either it's all free or none of it's free, because you can't have it both ways.
Right. And which I think is the core argument of the American Freedom Defense Initiative, right? That we can say whatever we want, including representations of the Prophet Muhammad. And
that's true.
Yeah.
That's 100% true. You can, in the Western world, for most of the Western world, you can create what was that called? Piss Christ.
Yeah.
That was Jesus Christ made out of, what was it, dung and pee.
Yep.
That was, according to some of my conservative friends, paid for by the taxpayers' money.
Sure. Yep. It was indirectly, but sure.
Yeah, it was in an art museum, so I guess art museums are evil.
And often somewhat government sponsored through
somewhat through grants,
grants and things.
And that's okay. And so the point is like there is this fear that Islam is getting a protective status that Christianity or Judaism or any other religion doesn't get, solely for the fact that, solely for the fact that Islam is perceived, and I'm going to say this again, perceived, sure. Big word here, perceived, as being more violent. That there's this Islamophobia that permeates, that's giving them a protected status. I'm using air quotes for those of us who can't see me doing the hands like this. And that's what they're fighting against for a lot of people. There are some people who, and it seems like this is one of them, who want to do this and say, see, I told you.
Yeah.
I think with Charlie Hebdo, that was, they did it because it's satire and they want to show, again, everything's there or nothing's there.
Right.
I think they did one where Jesus Christ was doing something inappropriate.
Look, Charlie Hebdo very seldom pulls its punches, right? Like, actually, this week, the cartoonist behind the original Muhammad on the cover of Charlie Hebdo, said he's not going to draw the Prophet anymore. Not because, he's being quelled, but because it just doesn't interest him anymore. Probably something related to his friends dying. Has helped decrease that interest. But but he was trying to make the point, like, no, this isn't that the terrorists have won. This is, I just am not interested. It's not funny to me anymore, and I'm a satirical cartoonist.
Yeah, it's time to move on, is his understanding, and that may be, and it also may be that. And I hate to say this, I'm going to say this in my stereotypical conservative voice. Well, guess what? The terrorists have won.
But have they? You gotta feel, I feel for the imam who tweeted, right? Because here he is already discriminated against minority in this country, living in the South, in Texas, where the conservatism, I grew up there, and going back there, is quite militant. And the discrimination is rampant, and the Islamophobia is palpable. And he is trying to lead a peaceful mosque of believers, and someone from outside the United States comes in and plays into every fear that every Islamophobic Texas conservative could have, and he's stuck. It is the 99.9% of Muslims worldwide and the 99.999 whatever percent of Muslims in this country who are, law-abiding, America-loving, as much as is reasonable, for a country that actively discriminates against you. But, they're citizens of the United States who are not interested in whatever Islamic State is interested in. They're more interested in their version of the American dream, which is not incompatible with my version of the American dream, or incompatible with your version of the American dream. I'm making some assumptions about your version of the American dream.
It involves robots and me being overlord of Skynet.
Okay, the existence of peace-loving, productive Muslims in this country, not incompatible with that goal. So good. You're good. Really, that's who I have the most sympathy for. Yes, we should be able to represent the Prophet Muhammad. Maybe we, as white Christian Americans, I say we because both you and I are that, maybe not that we can't represent the Prophet Muhammad, but just as I don't depict Satan regularly in my art, because that would be insensitive to many Christians, and just is not, just because you can doesn't maybe mean you should.
Right.
Or maybe you should. Maybe you want to make the point, because Islamic State, I think, we have reached the conclusion a long time ago. Islamic State is not a positive influence in this world, right?
No.
It's the closest you and I have ever got to being in favor of warfare. It was our discussion of the Islamic State, right? Maybe you should represent the Prophet Muhammad, but maybe if you're going to do that, for God's sakes, separate the 99.99% of Muslims who are peace-loving, law-abiding, kind of offended that you're doing this thing, but not going to stop you, in the same way that, I don't go and attack Bill Maher's studio, even though I'm kind of offended by some of the BS he puts out there, because he's not objectively evaluating religion. He's an atheist evangelist and not honest about that, right? I don't have a problem. I really don't have a problem with atheists. I have a problem with militant atheists in the same way that I have problems with militant Christians. I don't like, people who don't embrace postmodernism. That's like, that's your reality and this is my reality. In the Muslim community, you're kind of forced into that situation where they have to kind of recognize other people's reality because they're living as a minority group. So yeah, if you're going to represent the Prophet Muhammad, do it. Fine. Let's stand up to this evil force. I'm going to grant it that far. But in no way think that that is every Muslim. Right?
Right.
That there's a difference between the Dallas Muslim community in the Islamic State. And this should be an obvious statement, by the way. This is not some earth-shattering thing that I have just said. But I get the sense, when you talk about things like the Islamification of this country, because all religious groups are protected, by the way.
Yeah.
And they're not protected in that people can't say bad things about them, although the Christian right works really hard at that. They are protected in that they are given a special legal status. These are legally protected practices, in the same way that my Sunday morning service is legally protected. I have the right to practice my religion within some very reasonable bounds.
Yes.
Right? So do Muslims. So yes, they do have a specially protected status, but in the same way that every religion does. And Christianity, in its history, and I'm not talking about like 1,000 years ago. We don't have to talk about the Crusades. Let's talk about Northern Ireland, right?
Yeah.
You want to talk about
Protestants versus Catholics.
Right. You want to talk about Christianity's bloody history. It's within the past century. It's within the past 30 years. I used to get searched at airports because I looked vaguely Irish. This is no joke. The British Airways loves to search me because I look Irish, because I'm like full-blooded Scotch Irish. I would look Irish, right? Pallid red hair. It's a dead giveaway. All I need is the green eyes and I'm sold, right?
Yep.
You know, I blend in very well in Scotland and Ireland. I'm chunkier, so Scotland is more my homeland. With some, the broad-shouldered folks, but anyways, so like Christianity has been violent for a very long time. So it is somewhat unfair to look at world events and go, we are in political opposition to certain Muslim extremist groups. Therefore, the Muslims in this country are more violent. Let's keep in mind, this is a somewhat controversial statement.
Okay.
Why? Israel is a very, very violent country. Right? Objectively, it is. We make the political argument that its violence is justified because we're on their side. But they are a very violent country. Again, the political argument is self-defense. And I'm not actually trying to poke a hole in that argument. I think personally, they take self-defense too far. And turn it into a ghettoization of a people, which to me is morally troubling for a country founded on the idea that the Holocaust would never happen again. Right?
Yeah.
That this is always seen in tension with me. Israel, it does struggle to survive. That is historically and currently factual. But some of the things they do, I think, go way too far into the ends justify the means. But that's just me. But let's just go off of amount of violence, okay? So Israel, fairly violent as self-defense, but we don't then just go and say, well, this group of predominantly Jewish people are violent, ergo Jews in this country are violent. No, we don't make that leap. Well, no. Right? Or, unfortunately. Yeah. My point, this is not my pro-Palestine. It's great. That's a different episode, I guess. Because I'm not against, I'm not anti-Israel. I'm just pro some sort of peaceful solution. My point is we don't do this same sort of transferist with Jewish people. Why are we doing this with Muslim people? Why are we, Stephen? Why are we doing this with Muslim people?
Because people take verses out of context. Because
so the ban, right? Like the biblical concept of the ban. You shall leave nothing alive. That's in the Bible.
That's the Bible. But the thing is, what they'll say is, "Oh, but Jesus Christ came and took that away."
Who's also recognized as prophet in Islam.
Exactly. But here is what I think is some of the understanding, and again, I am not a Muslim. I am a Stephen.
Yep. Fantastic. Yep.
And that being said,
Can that be the title? I am not a Muslim, I am a Stephen.
yes.
That might get read the wrong way.
It would probably, so we're not going to call it that. Anyway,
No.
I think the problem, again, air quotes, the problem as seen by those of the I only want free speech for me, and I want to show you that everything is wrong, is because, well, number one, the assumption is if you're not speaking out against it, you're implicitly for it. I.e., the fact that the Muslim community as a whole hasn't all stood up and said no, that's not us, means that they're okay with it. And then my thought on that is, as Christians, do we then have to stand up and say, Westboro Baptist, that's not us, and we condone it? Because a lot of Christian organizations, a lot of Christian churches, they won't do that because the assumption is, that's the extreme fundamentalist conservative view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what most Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox churches believe.
Also, so in some ways, this show comes out of our want to be able to say that's not us, right? Yeah. I mean, it's somewhat of, the history of this show is to provide a space for us to be on record talking about these things and going, yeah, but we're not like that, right? Yeah. That is core, is us responding to things in particular, like Westboro Baptist. When I've told this story before, when Westboro Baptist picketed General Conference in 2012, I stood with a sign across the street from them saying God loves all. Right? As a way of reminding the world that we're not all like that.
Yeah.
But it is really easy for people to sitting in a dominant position to go, well, why didn't you all deny it? Well, what's the means to do that? Who speaks for the Muslim community? Who speaks for the African American community? Right? The civil rights movement in some ways is a blip because there was this kind of like one point person. The same with Gandhi's movement or the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. There were these point people who could speak for the community. But they didn't really. I mean, they were like elected figures. They just became accepted leaders. Methodist Church doesn't really have that, right? Only General Conference can do that. So how can all Methodists speak out except once every 4 years? It's really, so why didn't you all speak out? Well, how exactly? And I think to your point, why should they have to?
Yeah.
Why should, because some very, again, an extremely small, microscopically small minority of Muslims are bad. Just like I think more than a microscopically small percentage of Christians are bad. This is not a uniquely Muslim problem.
No.
Why should they have to go and deny every stupid thing that happens in the name of Allah? Right? Why should they have to defend themselves? They're full citizens of this country.
Yeah.
And because if we use this logic, because X group of people are bad, there are bad people in every group.
Yeah.
And I feel so motivated because the number of bad things I see in the Christian community, the number of bad things I see in the white community, the number of bad things I see in the straight community, to do this show where we can talk about these things. But you shouldn't have to do that, right? You shouldn't have to.
No.
And they shouldn't. And that shouldn't be the expectation. That they're just going to, do whatever you want them to do to prove they're Americans. Why do they have to prove it? They have their damn passports. Yeah. They're Americans. Or they're humans. Bloody hell. There we go.
There we go. They're humans, bloody hell.
They're humans, bloody hell. It's just... Yeah. I mean, yeah. We're not going to resolve this issue. But just, pray for the Muslim community. And not in the way that usually means.
Yes.
Pray for their safety.
Yep.
Pray for the millions of peacemakers found within them. And pray that maybe the world, that American mainstream culture will see differently.
Yes.
And on that overly optimistic note, it's time to end. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of SYN Boldly. If you have any feedback for us, SYN Boldly at endfear.org, facebook.com/the Sign Your Name Project, or at SYN Boldly on Twitter. And with that, go in peace to love and serve the Lord and end fear by signing your name. Good night. We did it. We made it through the show.
We did. No swears.
Well, I did swear, but none that Americans really recognize as swearing.
That's true.
Bloody hell is actually reasonably offensive.
That's true.
That's why I use it. Lets me swear without people really knowing what I'm doing. It's a very childish way of handling life.
What a woo.